Check, 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 check. Check, check.
The only thing that would have been a different direction. Yeah, well, if I had gone to college, then I probably could have I also wouldn't have got into Shanghai.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for tonight's show featuring master storyteller Will Hornyak and his tales for Dia de Los Muertos and Halloween. We have just a few housekeeping notes before we get going. First, a bit about the venue for those who are not familiar. Artichoke Music started over 50 years ago and has transformed into a nonprofit 501c3 in 2006. Artichoke Music is comprised of three entities: the performance venue you are in right now, a music school upstairs that offer classes in a range of folk and acoustic music disciplines, and a musical instrument store that is adjacent to the venue. Artichoke Music is supported by audience such as yourself and a large volunteer staff. Tonight, your volunteers include Steve, who greeted you at the door as you came in, Lee behind the bar, Chris on sound, and Hester on video. If you might be interested in volunteering to help support Artichoke's mission, we would love to have you. And you can find out more by visiting our website at artichokemusic.org. And if you enjoyed tonight's show, why don't you consider making a tax-deductible financial contribution to help directly support this important community resource. A couple notes before we start. There are 3 bathrooms available for your use. One is right up front to the left of the stage, one in the back of the music store, and one at the top of the stairs that leads to the music classrooms. During the performance, it's best if you don't use the restroom next to the stage for obvious reasons. Yes, exactly. We will be having an intermission. Is that right, Will? Will we have an Yes, we'll be having an intermission during this show, so you can refresh your drinks and snacks. Anything you purchase at the bar really does help support Artichoke's music and our mission. And most importantly, please be sure to silence your cell phones. And now, on to tonight's show with our special guest, Will Hornyak.
And, whoa. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Artichoke, many people know, has been around for 50 years. And some people know that artichokes, why artichoke? And the woman that started said, because artichokes are all heart, you know? And also, I'm a California kid. There's a lot of leaves in artichokes, too. And which means it makes a lot of people, takes a lot of people to make this place go. And I've been telling stories full-time as my career for 30 years. And so I want you to know I have seen some of the most beautiful gymnasiums, church basements, grange halls, and cafetoriums throughout Oregon. This is an upgrade. Let's hear it for Artichoke. Yeah. Well, thanks for coming out, everybody, to 2 great celebrations of the season, Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead, and Samhain, which we call Halloween. And I love, in particular, how the Mexican folks celebrate Day of the Dead. They take picnics into graveyards, and they dance. They bring guitars in, and they sing. Many people at home, they make these ofrendas, altars, and they put up pictures of all the beloved family member or friends that have passed on. They make the food that they like. They tell stories about them. You know, it's a great celebration, a way of including death as a part of life rather than the end of life, you know. So I always like to begin for Day of the Dead and Samhain just by bringing to mind some of the people that we know and love, friends, family that are on the other side now, our ancestors. Just call them to mind. And just like to light a candle on their behalf. So we have their spirits here tonight. And I want to tell you, I love this time of year. Fall is my favorite time of year, but it's also a sad time of year because my dad died 44 years ago in October. I was 28, but I was really close to my dad. And he had a stroke, and he was in the hospital in San Francisco, near where I live. So I go to visit him every day. And my dad was a talker, and he couldn't talk. He could use one hand, had no movement, couldn't walk or anything like that. His eyes were still very alive. He can communicate through his eyes, you know. And so I used to spend hours there every day. I'd massage him. I had the pleasure of suctioning all the phlegm out of his esophagus, you know. He suffered trying to breathe. So after a while, after about 6 weeks, the doctor came in and said, it's pretty much the respirator that's keeping him alive. And so I told my dad one day, I said, Dad, the doctor said this. And I said, do you want to go on? Do you want to keep the respirator on? Or do you want me to pull the plug? And I said, if you want me to do that, just squeeze my hand. And he just about crushed my hand when I put it out there, you know. So my mom was there in the room, and we hugged him. We cried. We said goodbye, and I pulled the plug. And the bugger lasted 6 more weeks. I know. And he actually improved a little bit, so we moved him from the hospital to a nursing home in Sonoma, California, right across the street from where my mom lived. So we could go there every day to visit, and we made his room really pretty. We put out all kinds of beautiful pictures of the family and stuff. But he finally did pass after another 6 weeks. But one of the reasons I like this time of year, too, is that my mom and dad and I used to always watch the World Series at this time of year. Go Mariners, right? Almost, right? Next year. Yeah. Go Jays. Yeah. Good, I like that. We get some fans going on here. That's good. But we used to always watch the baseball games. And so a couple years after my dad died, I was hanging out with my mom. We were watching the World Series. It was this time of year. And we were having a great time. And my mom just turned to me and said, isn't this sweet? You know, isn't this great? And I said, yeah, and this is really nice. And she said, let's call Dad. I said, Mom, that would be a really long distance call, you know. And she said, why? And I said, Dad died. And she went, oh, that's right, yeah. And I bring that up because it's interesting. At certain times, people, they do go and we don't see them any longer. And yet there are certain times when they feel closer than ever, you know. So I just want to raise a toast to all of our beloved that often feel so close. Sláinte, salud. I wrote a little poem to my dad a couple of years ago, and I just would like to recite it in honor of him. He was a doctor, but his hobby was woodworking, and he also liked to play the piano. I can still hear Alley Cat, Hello Dolly, St. Louis Blues, the theme from The Sting, and it goes like this, Prayer for My Father, it's called. My Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. You gave to me daily the bread of yourself, forgave me my ingratitude, and led me not into your expectations of my future, but towards a vision of mine own. Your love and care seated tenderness and discipline, courage and compassion upon my soul. Your surgeon's hands healed many, but your medicine was humor and music and laughter. You left so soon, but you remind me still every day to be of good cheer and of service, to make things with wood and with words, to respect and love my sisters, and to give the bread of myself freely to the world, and upon occasion to relieve people from melancholy and boredom with a joke or a story. For mine is a kingdom made from the soil of your sacrifice and love. All honor and glory to you, my Father, now and forever. Amen. Thank you. Well, the Irish celebrate Halloween a little differently than the Mexicans do. In ancient Ireland, they used to put all the lights out. So the island went completely dark for a 24-hour period. And during that time, you weren't supposed to go outside, or if you did, you'd put a weird costume on, you know, so you wouldn't be recognized by the spirits that could be coming from the other side, because the veil, as many know, that separated this world from the other was very thin those times, so you had to have a care. And during those times, often, people would get together in homes. They might light a candle or something like that and have a shot or a pint. And sometimes a storyteller, a shanachie, a traditional teller of tales might arrive, you know. And if they did, they were often given a plate of the local fare, a few bob, pence for their pocket, you know. And if they were lucky, well, look at that, a drop or two of ale or a ushkaba. Well, now, it is the time of Samhain. It is the time when the sickle and the scythe cut the barley corn and the wheat shaft low. But the grain, it finds new life again in the bread and the bannock and the oat cake and in the ale. May all of our reincarnations be so intoxicating. Sláinte. Well, now, I tell tales on Samhain and Imbolc and Lunasa at weddings and at funerals, and despite the name Wake, people fall asleep at them all the time. So what do you think of a storyteller worth his salt would have a method, a strategy, a means of finding out if people were awake enough, sober enough to hear a tale? Well, of course they would, and I do, and mine is this. When I say Erin, if you want to hear a tale, you cry back, Gabra. It means long live Ireland. Erin! 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 No. It was a tale that happened not long after the famine times, when so many had died of the cholera and the hunger. And there wasn't enough of us to bury all those in the proper way. People died in the beds, they died in the roads, in the fields. And because of that, there weren't enough prayers, tears, or songs said. And the old ones will tell you, it is the tears of the living that make the streams upon which the dead sail home. And without that, well, there can be trouble. And nobody knows that better than Mary Culhane. You could see her father that night, Patrick Culhane, coming out of the pub, deep in his cups, as he often was, trying to wash away the grief. For he had lost the entire family, the wife and the 6 children, everyone, except for his oldest daughter, Mary Culhane. And as he came out of the pub, he knew, wouldn't she be waiting up for him? Wouldn't she have supper ready for him, as she always did? And because he remembered that, well, wouldn't he be taking the shorter way home? Even if that meant going over the hill instead of around it, even if it meant going through the old graveyard. Well, it would. And he did. And no one had ever said what it was that terrified Patrick Culhane. But something did. It was the cry of a banshee, or the cry of a raven, or some wind that blew through him. But as he walked, he dropped the blackthorn cane that he carried, and he flew down the path a mile to his house, and he got in, breathing hard, and his daughter said, Dad, what is it? What's happened? And he said, Mary, there's something in that graveyard. I don't know what it is. And then he realized, oh, no. And she said, Dad, what is it? He said, I left the blackthorn cane. I dropped the cane behind. Now you need to know this. A blackthorn cane like that was much more than just a walking stick. A blackthorn cane like that, having been handed down from great-grandfather to grandfather and grandfather to father, and then to Patrick Culhane's hand, that was like kith and kin, you see. And the old ones, they'll tell you, a blackthorn cane like that, it had a blessing in it, carried a protection around it. And Mary Culhane, she knew such things. And she said, Dad, not to worry. I'm off to get it. I'll be back in the blink of an eye. And he said, you're not going there. You're not going to that graveyard, not on this night. And she said, I don't worry about such things like that, the ghosts and the goblins and such. She said, I tell you, have your supper and to bed with you. I'll be back in the blink of an eye. Mary Culhane was brave, but there are times when bravery is not a virtue. You can see her now, putting a shawl around her against the cold. And just as she walked out, she did what she always did. She took the kerchief her mother had given her and put it around her neck. Out the door, she went and down the road, and it was a ragged, cloudy night, and the moonlight was just cutting through the clouds, and the wind was just blowing. And she walked by the great stones in the field, and to the path, and she wound her way up to the graveyard, and she walked through it. She found it. She saw it. The blackthorn cane just laying down there. And she smiled as she reached for it, remembering her great-grandfather and her grandfather, and she took it and she grabbed it, and it held on briar and bramble, no doubt. And she pulled again, and it held tight. And when she pulled with all her strength the third time, a hand came out of the grave, right with that blackthorn cane. And just like that, it caught her by the wrist. And this ragged corpse crawled out of the grave and climbed right up on her back. And he was unearthly strong, and he was cold as ice. And she said, get off of me. Whatever you are, get off of me now. And he said, what is your name, lass? And then he put his hand to her throat and would have torn the life right out of her. And he squeezed and squeezed. And she said, 'tis Mary Culhane. 'Tis Mary Culhane. Now you listen to me, Mary Culhane. You take me out of this graveyard and down to the village, for I'm hungry and I must eat. It was as if her feet moved by themselves. And she brought this corpse clinging to her from the graveyard down the path and into the village. They went to this hut and that one, and he said, no, not that one. It's got the smell of holy water on it. Not that one there, but that's the house. Mary Culhane knew the place. It was the Larkin house. She'd gone to school with the Larkin boys. They went into the kitchen. It seems as if he'd put a spell on the place, for no one stirred, no one heard a thing. And in the kitchen, the corpse, he said, now, Mary Culhane, you make me a porridge. She got the pot. She got the oats. She was about to add the water, and he said, oh, no. My porridge is not made with water. It is made with fresh blood. Take the knife and the bowl up the stairs now. And with that corpse clinging to her back, she climbed up and up the stairs and down the hall. They opened a door, and there was her friend Connor Larkin, a boy her own age, sleeping there. And the corpse put his hand on her wrist and said, to the neck now with a knife in the blood, to the bowl, Mary Culhane. And just like that, she cut. And the blood dripped into the bowl, and she saw the life of her friend just go right out of him. And they went to the next room, where Ian, a boy of 12, lay sleeping. Again, Mary Culhane, to the neck with a knife, blood to the bowl, and now again she cut. And she saw this boy just turn to ash. They went to the third room. It was a boy of 5 years old. She said, no, not him. He's but a boy. He's 5 years old. No. I said, to the neck with the knife, and now and the blood to the bowl. And again she cut, and again the blood to the bowl. And then she took it down to the kitchen. And the corpse climbed off her back, and he sat at table, and Mary Culhane indeed. She made a porridge with that blood and stirred it up, and she served him. And as he slurped away, he turned to her and said, now you eat as well of that, for you're coming back into the grave with me. And that's the food you'll know from now on. Now she knew she couldn't. She knew if she ate the food of the dead, she would be as they. And Mary Culhane was as cunning as she was brave. Now, she took the spoon and put it to her lips, but quiet as a cat, quick as a shadow. She took the kerchief. And she put the bloody gruel into the kerchief. She licked her lips to make her look like she'd been eaten. And then she took the kerchief with the gruel, put it in the cupboard, and closed it. And slurping her lips, she turned to the corpse and said, well, now, good Mary Culhane, it is time to get back to the grave before the light comes, for my power wanes with the light. And he climbed upon her back, and down the road they went. Now she knew she had to walk as slowly as she possibly could, knowing that the light would help to break his power. And finally a cock crowed. And before it did, he pointed to the stones in the field and he said, it is beneath those stones, Mary Culhane, that I buried my gold and silver, for I was once a man of means, but I've no use for it now. And when the cock crowed, he said, what was that? And she said, what, a wild goose flying in the clouds? They walked on, and again the cock crowed. He said, what was that, Mary Culhane? What do you mean, that dog barking at the moon? But the third time the cock crowed, the light began to rise. And he said, to the devil with you, Mary Culhane. 'Twas neither the goose nor the dog, 'twas the cock that crowed, for the light is coming out to the graveyard with you, and hurry. And again he put his hand to her throat, quickly now. And she moved on in haste. And they came up the path and into the graveyard. They came to his grave, and as she crawled off his back, as he crawled off her back, she broke free. But he grabbed her by the wrist, he grabbed her by the ankle, and she fell. And now he was pulling her and pulling her and pulling her right down deep into his grave. And she grabbed at briar and bramble and root and thorn, and she was cut and bleeding, but she was being pulled deeper and deeper into the grave. But that's when she saw it. At the corner of her eye, she saw that blackthorn cane. And somehow, she was able to reach out. And somehow, she was able to grab it. And the moment her hand touched that blackthorn cane, she knew a strength in her she'd never known before. For it was true. There was a blessing in it and a protection around it. And Mary Culhane somehow was able to rise up. And she brought that blackthorn cane down again and again and again. And with every blow she landed down, it seemed the light seemed to grow up and up and up all around her. And finally the strength of the corpse, it waned. She broke free. And covered now in soil and mud and blood, she took the cane. She flew down the path all the way into the village to the Larkin home. She could already hear the grief cries coming from it. She pounded on the door. It was Mr. Larkin that opened it, and he took one look and said, Mary Culhane, my God, what has happened? And she said, I can't tell you that, Mr. Larkin. I can only tell you this. Allow me in. There might be a way to save the boys. She pushed him out of the way. She made her way into the kitchen. She opened the cupboard, and she remembered the kerchief with the bloody gruel, and she took it. For Mary Culhane remembered what the old ones told her. Every cut makes its own cure. Every wound makes its own medicine. And Mary Culhane, she remembered what the old ones told her. Up the stairs she went, down the hall. She came to the first room, and she took that bloody gruel like a salve, and ever so gently she laid it upon Conor Larkin's cut there, and waited and waited and waited. And okay, she could see him breathing again. She went to the next room and put it on Ian's cut, and again he came to life. And she went to the third room with Finn, and she put that on his cut, and she waited and waited, and at last he too came to life. And those three boys grew up as good and strong as any boys you'd ever want to meet. When she went back into the hallway, it was Mrs. Larkin that found her. She held Mary Culhane as she wept. Mrs. Larkin took her down the stairs, she bathed her, and Mary Culhane told her the entire tale that I've told you. She dressed her in fresh clothes and walked her home. And when Mary Culhane opened the door to her home, her father was still snoring away. Mary Culhane never ever told her father the tale that I've just told you. But in time, she and Connor Larkin were wed. She told him about the gold beneath the stones. Oh, they found it. They lived free from want after that time. But the first thing they did with that newfound wealth was to set every gravestone right, to clear every briar and bramble from that graveyard. And when all that was done, all the people came to that place. All the songs were sung, all the prayers were said, and all the tears were shed. And from that day to this, that graveyard has been a blessed place. For the old ones will tell you, it is the tears of the living that make the rivers upon which the dead sail home. And there's none that know that better than Mary Culhane. Sláinte. Was that sufficiently gruesome, or should I try harder next time? I tell that.
Gone into a little more detail.
You're never going to look at porridge the same again. I tell that story in sometimes in middle schools, and then when I'm done, I say, "Was that gruesome enough for you?" And everybody goes, "No, we weren't scared, you know." But the whole time you're looking at them, they're like. Well, I want to change gears a little bit. What do you think of when you think of a fairy tale? What just comes to mind? Anybody? Just shout out a word or two. Fairy tales. Happily ever after. Okay. Frogs. There you go. Happily ever after, frogs. Somebody last week said Carl Jung. There you go. Wrote a lot of fairy tales, Carl Jung. Yeah.
Snow White.
Snow White, good.
Castles.
Castles. Once upon a time. Witches, yeah, and our Hester is back there, dressed perfectly. Jack Zipes, a great scholar of the Grimm's brothers in particular, but all fairy tales in general, he once said, fairy tale books and fairy tales are not so much about magic and wonder as they are manuals for survival. You know, they are primers in the lore of psychological, physical, emotional, and spiritual survival. And he said, they're great examples of how life is as terrifying as it is beautiful, as wonderful and mysterious as it can be cruel and challenging, and how life requires every bit of guts and grit we have, as well as compassion, love, and forgiveness. And in many fairy tales, it seems that princesses or women are waiting for a man to come along. They don't have agency in their own lives. But there's a whole body of fairy tales that are the exact opposite. And this is one, not surprisingly, from the Norse collection of fairy tales, right? And of course, it didn't happen in thrice, it didn't happen in twice, it happened what? In once upon a time. Once upon a time when time moved a lot more slowly than it does today. In a time when far fewer people were doing hard time. In a time when people just seemed to have time. There was a place of incredibly beautiful, majestic fjords and deep inlets and wild forests and these beautiful flowing rivers. And in that realm, there was a people as wild and as vital as the landscape. And in that realm, there was a palace, in the palace, a king and a queen. And in the heart of the king and the queen, there was a sadness that was great. Because try as they might, they couldn't have a child. That was no small thing, because in those days, of course, the fertility of the queen was thought to be connected to the fertility of the land, and the vitality of the king was the vitality of the realm. And so the king and the queen and the people, they worried. And finally, the king and queen decided to bring an 8-year-old niece of theirs in the palace just to live there, to have a child about. And they gave to her a beautiful golden ball, and she played with it every day all around the palace. But her favorite thing to do was to go out of the palace, through the beautiful gardens, to the edge of the deep wood. And she was told, don't go into the woods. But she loved at that place right at the edge. She loved to look into the dappled sunlight as it came through the trees and feel the cool of the woods. At times she would hear the cry of a raven or see a stag walking by. And one day she saw a girl her own age coming through the woods. It was a forest child. And she loved to come to the edge of the forest and look into the garden and see the cultivated flowers and hear music from the palace, you know. And the little forest child, she said to the queen's niece, she said, can you show me that ball? And she just took it and she threw it from the garden into the woods, and the little forest girl, she caught it. And then she threw it back. And all day long they played that way. And it was a beautiful sight, this golden ball going from the sunlit gardens into the light of the dappled forest, into the cool of the shade, and back into the manicured gardens, back and forth. And they played all day and all the next day and the next day. But the next day, the queen noticed her niece playing with this forest child. And she descended the steps and she said, what are you doing playing with this ragged little forest urchin? And she said to the forest child, you get yourself away and do not come back. But the little girl didn't. She focused her little eyes upon the queen, and she said, you wouldn't talk to me that way if you know what my mother knows. My mother knows how to conjure forth fruit from any woman's womb. Because my great-grandmother taught my grandmother, and my grandmother taught my mother, and my mother's going to teach me how to make a seed grow in any woman's womb, and she could do it for you too. Well, the queen changed her tone a little bit. She said, well, dear child, I didn't mean to be rude, but why don't you tell your mother the king and queen would like to talk to her tomorrow? So the next day, this forest woman, this kind of forest crone, came through the woods, and she knocked on the palace door, and the king and queen, they let her in, and the queen said, your lovely child told us that you have some expertise in family planning, fertility in particular, and we're wondering if you could assist us. But she said, you really shouldn't listen to what tattered ragamuffin forest urchins tell you, should you? What my child says and the truth rarely bear anything in common. I'm sure I really can't help you. And she got up to go. But just as she walked out the door, the king said, would you like a drink? And she said, what have you got? And he said, well, we have a fresh kombucha, cold lemonade, whiskey. I'll take whiskey. He poured her a glass, and she drank another. And about the third glass, she said, maybe I can help you. Why don't you show me your sleeping arrangement, and I'll see if I can offer some advice. And they led her up these stairs and up another set of stairs to the very top of the palace, and there was a little room. And there were like two little twin beds separated by about 6 feet of space, and each had a little bedside table and a reading lamp. And she said, oh. She said, seed needs to be a little closer to soil, And she said, here's what I want you to do. She gave him very explicit instructions. And the next day, the king went to the carpenter and said, I need a new bed, right? And that was the first king-size bed. Right? Abby, who writes this stuff? Who writes this stuff? It was a big bed. And they put a canopy on it, of course, but they actually took it outside of the palace. And they put it in this beautiful meadow ringed by these gorgeous trees, And they took the canopy off that in favor of the canopy of the stars and the moon. And that evening, the king and the queen, they walked down through this candlelit path to the meadow, to the bed. And there were two bathtubs there, filled with warm water, scented with lilac and verbenum. And the queen bathed in both of those tubs. And then she got out, and then she took a pail, because that's what the forest crone told her to do. Take a pail, and then she cast out some of the water beneath the bed. That water with her soil and skin and hair and stuff. And then she and her husband went to bed, and they did in bed what men and women do in bed sometimes. They read poetry. Right? Yeah. They read Rumi, the subject tonight is love. You know? They read Walt Whitman, I sing the body electric. You know? They drank red wine. You know? And then they did some glaucoma prevention therapy, if that makes any sense, because an ounce of prevention is worth about $150 now, I think, isn't it? Anyway, they had a wonderful time, and then they made love. They made beautiful, rich, deep, sacramental love. They made wild, raucous, laughing love. They made sweet, tender love. They just made love. And the next day, they just stayed in bed all day. They ordered room service, and they spent the next night in bed and the next day in bed, because after all, they were the king and the queen. But aren't we all kings and queens? Yeah. Don't we all deserve a few days in bed? Yeah. Right? In room service? Yeah. Let's do it. Okay. Well, on the third day, the queen did as she was instructed. She looked under the bed, and she saw exactly what the forest crone told her she would see. She saw these two flowers. One was this lovely, graceful, fair white flower. And the other one was this sort of gnarly, radiant red flower. And she was given very explicit instructions. See if you can remember the instructions she was given, okay? Are you listening? Okay. Eat the white flower. Don't eat the red flower. Can we try that? Eat the white flower. Don't eat the red flower. Pretty simple, right? And she was a queen, you know. She had given instructions. She had taken instructions. And so she did as she was instructed. She ate the white flower. And it tasted good, and she swallowed it down. And she knew she shouldn't eat the red flower. So what did she do? She ate the red flower. Why do we do this stuff? Why do we do Has anybody here not done this stuff? We just do this stuff. Maybe she was reading some William Blake, because didn't he say you don't know what's enough until you know it's more than enough? And she soon would. Well, you know, time passed, the seasons changed, you know, the fall became winter, winter became spring, and with the spring, the snow melted, and the streams swelled, and her belly swelled with child. And she was so happy. And she wondered at times about the red flower, but she thought, you know, I'm a queen. What could possibly go wrong? Well, the day came. And everybody was there because it was a royal birth, you know, and the queen's chamber was crowded with all kinds of officials, and the midwife was there, and her water broke, and the midwife went down to assist the birth of the child, and she, looked down and looked at the queen wide-eyed, because out of the queen's room there ushered forth, or I should say there thundered out, this girl child, fully formed with black hair, and she had a wooden cooking spoon in her hand. And she was stirring things up right away, and, you know, and kind of bopping people on the head and running here and there, and people didn't know what to think, you know. Oh, there was one other thing I should mention about her appearance, because I think it shed some light on her character. She was riding a goat. Yeah. Those horned creatures on the hooves, you know. And the goat was kind of butting and bashing people, you know. But after a while, she said, don't worry, don't worry. Oh, she also wore a ragged robe with a tattered hood. And because of that, they called her Tatterhood. And Tatterhood said, don't worry, everybody, don't worry, don't worry. My sister is coming soon, and you're going to love her. She is as fair as I am foul. She's as tender as I am tough. And she is so sweet. And sure enough, a few minutes later, out of the queen's womb, there did usher forth this beautiful little girl with big blue eyes, you know, and they just embraced everybody. And she had her hands out, and people, they picked her up and they passed her from person to person, and she was so fine and so fair, they called her Fair Maiden. And it was the strangest thing, because Fair Maiden and Tatterhood, they were twins. And even though they were diametrically different and utterly distinct, they were also utterly inseparable, despite their mother's best efforts. The mother said to Tatterhood, honey, we have a room for you. It's a ground floor room. Actually, the floor is the ground. We thought it'd be better for your goat. And it's also near the stables where maybe you could work with the animals. Now, they gave to Fair Maiden a room right beside the king and the queen's chamber, a big airy room with a nice view, with a little piano in there, and room for the French tutor to arrive and teach lessons. But the thing was, Tatterhood was often coming up the steps and pulling Fair Maiden down out of her room, and they'd go out into the stables and the stalls, and she'd put her on her goat, and they'd ride out into the forest, and she'd teach her how to catch snakes and frogs and how to climb trees, and wade in the creeks and the streams. And then Fair Maiden, she would take her gritty, tough sister, she'd lead her up the stairs and lay her down on the bed, and they'd read poetry and sing songs and play dolls. They'd watch the sunset. They were utterly inseparable. But of course, as time passed, they grew a little bit different, and Tatterhood was tough and gritty, and she preferred people of that ilk. And Fair Maiden, she was intellectual, and she was cultivated, and she preferred people of that ilk. Had they been alive today, Tatterhood probably would have been a goth or something, with some tattoos and a few piercings, and probably making really cool art with a blowtorch or something, And Fair Maiden, she would have been playing the violin and studying French and maybe getting ready to study abroad or something like that. But the strangest thing was this. It was in those days they needed each other more than ever. Because you see, as tough as Tatterhood was, she had a very tender heart. And only Fair Maiden knew. Because you could imagine a teenage girl riding a goat with a cooking spoon and a tattered head would attract a few derogatory comments, Hey, ugly, that goat your boyfriend? What are you doing with that stick? On and on it would go, and sometimes those comments, well, they took a toll. But only Fair Maiden knew that when her sister was raging and bouncing around on that goat and just bashing people over the head, that she was hurt. And it was then she'd lead her up the stairs and open her bedroom door, and there'd be incense lit and candles, and she'd pour a bath for her sister and put her in there and wash her back, and they'd talk for hours. And finally, Tatterhood's huge heart would just break open, and she could finally just weep. And Fair Maiden, for her part, as beautiful as she was and brilliant and popular and all that, she was incredibly judgmental. She didn't believe she was owed any respect or love unless she did everything perfectly. And when she didn't, she was merciless with herself and with others. But only Tatterhood knew that. And at some times as that, she'd go up the stairs and she'd say, Sister, come here. And she'd bring Fair Maiden down the steps, and they'd walk through the stalls and stables and the smell of the hay and the dung, and they'd get on the goat and they'd ride in the woods. And she already had a little campfire made, and she'd serve her brandy that she'd stolen from the king and queen's liquor cabinet. And she'd tell her dirty jokes. And pretty soon they'd just be laughing away, having a great time. And then finally, she would weep too. But years passed now. And these two sisters, Tatterhood and Fair Maiden, they became young women. And as royal young women, they had to have the coming out party, And Fair Maiden, who had a very strong inner Martha Stewart, she was all about this thing, She had menu items in mind already, and colors and fashion and everything. But Tatterhood went to the king and said, Daddy, let's have the party for Fair Maiden. This really isn't my kind of thing. Plus, I don't think it's a good idea to have all my friends together in a place where there's strong drink and breakable objects together. And the king agreed. Well, the day came, and it was an amazing event. Had you been outside the palace and looked up from a distance, it just would have looked like a huge beacon just burning. There was so much light, and inside there was beautiful music and lutes and violins, and people were dancing, and there was erudite conversation, and there was beautiful tables just groaning beneath the weight of delicacies of every kind. But you know how it is sometimes. When the light shines so brightly, it makes big shadows. And this big party, it kind of aroused a shadowy element within the realm, And pretty soon, every witch and troll and ogre and knuckle dragon Neanderthal, they were on their way towards the palace, you know. Hey, we want a party too, you know. And there were hundreds of them surrounding the place. Motorcycle gangs were there, you know. Heavy metal bands, you know. And the king and queen looked down and was like, ooh, what are we going to do? But Tatterhood looked down and said, I got this. I know these folk. Actually, I do know a lot of these folk. And she said, I tell you what, I'm going to go out. I'm going to deal with them. But while I'm out, close the door, lock the door. Don't go out until I say so, okay? Don't go out until I what?
Say so.
Exactly. What could be simpler, you know? So she went out on the goat, and she was butting and battering at people and taking a cooking spoon and whacking them on the head, and she was saying, you're not going to crash my sister's party, you know? And she was thumping them and bumping them, you know, and pretty soon she was just cutting through them like a hot knife through butter, and the crowd cleared. You know, people slithered away, and they walked away and ran away and flew away, and everybody left. Everybody left, everybody. Except for one. You know, there's always that one that's the last to leave the party. It was a witch, this gnarly old witch, you know, and she was just hanging into one of those eaves up there in the eaves, just waiting for some dastardly deed to do, you know. And a door opened, and Fair Maiden, who was concerned about her sister, stuck her head out, and she said, Tatterhood, are you all right? Tatterhood, are you okay? Sister, are you all right? And Tatterhood said, close the door, close the door. It was too late. The witch, whoo, she swooped down. And just like she was plucking a cherry off a tree, she plucked Fair Maiden's head off her body. I know. But she replaced it with a calf's head. Because Norse witches always carry calf's heads. Right? I've done my research, and I know. And then the witch, she flew away with Fair Maiden's beautiful head, you know. Now, truth be told, it was a good-looking calf's head, you know. But Fair Maiden had a lovely voice, and now she was reduced to kind of bleating and mooing, you know. And it put sort of a damper on the party, you know. People didn't know what to say. They found excuses to leave, and that long line of suitors all interested in Fair Maiden's hand, they pretty much dried up. Have you ever lost anything you really, really, really wanted to get back? I don't mean just your cell phone or your wallet. I mean like your joy, your freedom, your happiness, your passion, you know. Well, your head. And there's this idea, you see, that when that happens, we often have to go to some place, either inside or outside, that we have never, ever, ever been to before. Not only that, the one to guide us there is that other part of ourselves, right? Maybe it's our evil twin, right? Or maybe it's our better angel, but it's some part of ourselves that maybe we don't even know. Because you see, while Fair Maiden was kind of bemoaning her fate, and getting all depressed and writing endlessly in her journal about what had happened, Tatterhood was busy making plans. She had a pretty good idea where those witches lived and how she could get Fair Maiden's head back, but she knew it was going to take some guts and some grit and some gumption and a little bit of offshore sailing as well. Now, the king, he loved Fair Maiden, but having a daughter with a calf's head was not the best reflection on his leadership. You know? So when Tatterhood came with a plan, he was all ears. And she said, Daddy, it's time we got Fair Maiden's head back. And I got an idea where those witches live, but I'm going to need a boat. And he said, honey, I've got for you a 100-foot-long clipper ship. It's got 3 masts and 30 sails. It's double-hulled with oak. It's got 10 cannons on the port side, 10 cannons on the starboard side, and there's 50 able-bodied sailors, and it is ready to go. And she said, Daddy, I'm thinking more of a stealth operation, not like a shock and an awe campaign, you know. This is something that Fair Maiden with a calf head and myself need to do by ourselves. And so, Daddy, as much as I love clipper ships, they're so majestic and all, what I'm thinking of is a 45-foot ketch, double-masted, single-hulled with cedar lapstrake over oak tines and fur decking and cabin and galley below, Because, you know, in the North Seas, the gales come up quickly, and you have to drop the main sheet and sail off the mizzen or the jib and avoid excessive wind over the helm. As well, it's easier to weigh anchor on a ketch, more so than a clipper or a yawl or even a cutter schooner for that matter. Now, I can tell you're out there wondering something right now. You're wondering a couple things. You're wondering, number one, I paid $20 for this? Plus fees? Oh my God! You're also probably wondering, how did Tatterhood know so much about sailings and all things navigational, right? And I'm going to answer that question with this question. Ever heard of the Vikings? Exactly. You see, Tatterhood and Fair Maiden, they were swimming around in the same gene pool as happy-go-lucky folk like Beowulf, you know. People that sailed the North Seas in open boats, right, in the wintertime, navigated by the stars. People like Eric the Red Hand, who cut off his hand and threw it on the shore of Ireland to be the first to touch that land and claim it for his people. These are folk not to be trifled with. Well, time passed, and the ketch was built, and the day came, and Tatterhood and Fair Maiden, they hopped on the goat, and you could see them kind of coming down the gangplank, and of course everybody turned out to say farewell to them, as people should turn out when you're going to a place you've never been to before to get something really important back, you know, some weird place like Oregon or something like that. You know. They all went down there, and they leapt from the gangplank on to the boat, and they raised sail, and the wind caught the sail. They raised anchor, and away they went. And the people, they cheered and toasted farewell. You want to cheer and toast them farewell? And here's to all those times we've had to leave home for one reason or another. Well, they sailed for days. Days became weeks, and they knew every kind of weather. Tempests and typhoons and great storms. At times they would be calmed in the doldrums, and they thirsted and they hungered, but they never lost sight of the stars. And one day they sailed into this wine-dark sea with strong currents and these deadly shoals and shifting sandbars, you know. And there was this huge island in the distance. They could see it. And big snow-capped peaks and ragged shores and big waves pounding the shores. And they could see from a distance there were bones upon the shore. And as they approached, there was a roar of thunder, and lightning was smashing everywhere. And Tatterhood just dropped anchor, and she said, "This looks like the place." They found a sheltered bay, and they rowed ashore. And because that goat had not had fresh grass for quite some time, you can imagine, it leapt from the boat onto the shore, and it happily carried Fair Maiden and Tatterhood, Fair Maiden with the calf's head and Tatterhood, in deeper and deeper to the island. And that's where they saw it. That's where they saw it. They came to this wide valley ringed by these huge, huge, beautiful fir trees, and there were snow-capped peaks in the distance. And there, upon a rise, there was this most amazing sight, something they had never, ever, ever seen before, and they would never forget what they saw. And what it was, we will find out right after the break. What a cheap storytelling trick. Right? We're going to take a really short break, just 10 minutes, okay? And belly up to the bar, and thanks for coming out, everybody. And the last part of the story is shorter than the first part. Okay? Thanks, everybody. Should we bring this back to order again? As if we had any order in the first place, right? I also wanted to thank everybody who is not here, but in Zoom land all over the place. Thank all of you for tuning in. Let's give them a hand. And it required some patience for the online folk to get online, and we thank you for that. Artichoke is switching to a new system, so we're working some bugs out, but thanks so much for being here. Here's the shameless promotion part of our evening, okay? Not long ago, about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, I wrote a little poetry book. For a few years, I was putting out a poem about once a month on Facebook. And I had a number of friends say, why don't you put this into a collection? People, they said, well, people do this. They're called books, you know? I said, hey, that's a great idea. So I did that, and this is called This Altar of Earth and Sky. And my publisher is here tonight, which is me, right? And I published it because I knew nobody else would. And also, it fits a particular niche that I'm sure you're familiar with. It includes carpentry, baseball, fishing in Alaska, mythology, and bits and bits of Catholicism too. So it's all here in 21 poems. You know. Anyway, they're for sale back there for $12. There's a QR code, or you can just pay cash too. Anyway, my book. Yep. Oh, thank you very much. Where were we?
On the island.
On the island. Beautiful island, don't you think? Right? I love that part where thunder, lightning, it's just often there's bones on the shore, and what does she say? Must be the place. Right? Here we are. So they look up and they see this incredible sight. They see a lodge. It is this enormous lodge, big gabled timbers and huge stones and earthen bulwarks, right? And it's surrounded by these ancient gnarled trees, and there must be 5 chimneys and smokes curling from the chimneys, and they can see beautiful yellow light coming from the windows. And so they make their way towards it, and they peer in the window. Tatterhood and calf-headed Fairman, they peer in the window, and they look. And this is a women's lodge, this is where women have been meeting for eons and eons and eons of time. And there's all kinds of women in there. There's witches, of course, and sorceresses, and there's healer women and massage therapists, of course, too. And they're very wise old crones and stuff. But there's also goddesses and demi-goddesses in there, too. Kuan Yin, the Buddhist Kuan Yin, was way back there. She was teaching a meditation class, you know. And there was Isadora Duncan. She was teaching a dance class with Kali, you know, the Hindu Kali, you know. And there was Scheherazade, right? And she was chatting up Dorothy Parker and the Bronte sisters, you know. And Lucille Ball and Joan Rivers were just cracking them both up. You know, they were laughing and laughing and laughing, you know. And Cleopatra was there, and Nefertiti, you know.
She said Jane Goodall.
Jane Goodall was there, too. Oh, she was a recent arrival, and she was happy to be welcomed home, you know. And there was Queen Maeve from Ireland. She was pouring big goblets of mead for people, and singing bawdy songs, you know. And over here, there was St. Bridget, and she was chatting up Mary Magdalene, you know. Mary Magdalene was teaching younger women how to turn water into wine. Yeah. She said, I actually taught Jesus that trick, but he gets all the credit. You know? Anyway, there were just fantastic women of every stripe and color and kind there, you know. And the sisters looked in, and then Tatterhood looked up, and she noticed Fair Maiden's head. They kind of tacked it on a wall there, kind of like a trophy stag, you know. But as she looked at her face, she could tell it was still beautiful, but it looked a little different, you know. It looked a little bit more serious, and she had kind of a wry smile on her face, you know. And she had a couple of gray hairs in her head, too. And the thing was, she had been sort of schooled among all these women, all these poems and songs and stories that and dirty jokes they've been telling, for weeks and weeks and weeks. And her head was in a whole different place, At the same time, she was looking forward to a more embodied experience of her own life, And when she saw Tatterhood, she kind of gave her a wink, and Tatterhood knew the time had come. And she turned to calf-headed Fairmaiden and she said, honey, you stay here. I'll be right back. Now, had you been inside that palace, you would have just heard this, the door just smashed open, and there was this goat, this billy goat with his horns down and head down, and he comes tromping in, and there's this crazy girl with a ragged robe and a tattered hood, and she's waving a cooking spoon around, and these women are just backing away looking at this person, and she jumps onto the feasting table, and she just plows right down the middle of it, because at the end of the feasting table, there's the wall, and there's Fairmaiden's head, and she takes her cooking spoon, and she gets the head off the wall. And now she turns, and she's ready for a fight. She knows she's going to have some kind of battle to get out of this place. And she turns, and she takes the head, and she holds up that cooking spoon, and she looks, and she, She sees all these women, all these goddesses and demi-goddesses and wild women, and they've all poured a drink in their cups, and they've all stood up, and they all just backed up. You see, these women, they understood grit and gumption and guts and courage in whatever form it appeared. And they had a pretty good idea what it took just to find this place, let alone to come on shore, let alone to break down the door and jump on a table to get your sister's head back. They knew what that required. And they just thought Tatterhood was pretty cool. And Tatterhood, she came ready for a battle, but she was getting a blessing instead, something she had never, ever, ever had. And she watched as all these women raised their cups to her, just like that. And they cheered her, and they saluted her, and they said, keep on keeping on. And that was a blessing that went into her so deeply she would never, ever, ever, ever forget it. And here's to those times when we have been seen. Here's to those people that have seen us, and here's to those people that we need to see and bless. Cheers. Well, there was work to be done now, because, as you can probably imagine, there was a head exchange to be made. And it happened in this way. Tatterhood, with Fairmaiden's head, went outside, and first she plucked the calf's head off of Fairmaiden's body. And it just so happened that there was a headless calf wandering around. And it's because of this. That island was the source of the calf heads that the witches used, right? So although I can't always promise veracity, I'm trying to at least attempt congruity here, right? Can't we at least do that, Abby? And so she put the calf's head on the calf, and it just kind of moved and went away quite happy. And then she put her sister's head back on her sister's body, and the two of them got on the goat, they rowed down, they hopped upon the boat, and they slept a long night, and they woke up, and for a couple days they just told stories about all the stuff they had seen. Of course, Fairmaiden had lots of stories about the lodge and the different people she met and their ideas and everything, and Tatterhood would tell her all about that great journey and through the storms and the seas and everything. And then they didn't know what to do. They thought about going back to Father's palace, but it just didn't seem so alluring anymore. But they didn't know what to do. But one day they woke up. You know how some days you wake up and you just know what to do? They're rare, but it happens. It was this crystal clear, I don't know about you, but crystal clear sky. And the wind was fresh, and the tide was swelling in, And they had what philosophers from Socrates to Sartre sometimes call a Thelma and Louise moment. They're just like, yeah, we know what to do, right? Right, Erica? Sometimes that happens, right? And they raised sail, and the wind caught the sail, and they decided what they were going to do is see the world. And man, they just set off to travel. And they did. And they loved the wide ocean and the domes of stars at night. They loved the rocky shores and the beautiful sheltered harbors. And they would go into different ports and many, many lands and talk to many kinds of people. And wherever they went, they could find work. Tatterhood, she was good with boats and herding sheep and goats. And she learned how to cook with that cooking spoon. And Fair Maiden, she always could teach, and languages and music and stuff. But most of what they did, what they loved to do more than anything, was just to gather up all the songs and poems and stories of the people in a particular place. They just learned from them, and they would just absorb that all. Then they would travel to the next place. And then they would tell those people all the stories and poems and songs that they had learned. And then they would gather their stories and poems and songs and music and dances. Then they go to the next place. Months went on this way. Years went on this way. And the strangest thing was these two sisters, by telling all these tales, they sort of wove together these far-flung villages and lands. So even though people never saw or met one another, they didn't feel as distant from one another because they knew stories and poems and songs about them, Well, they became sort of famous, and time it did pass, and then you know how it sometimes happens. They came into a place, and you know how you come to a place sometimes and you feel like you've been there, or maybe you feel like you don't ever want to leave there? And they came to a place like that, and I don't know what it was, maybe the way the air was, or the sight of the hills, or the way the rivers ran, and maybe it was the welcome of the people that was so rich, and they were treated as they were often treated. They told stories in private homes and in public houses and in castles and in hovels at crossroads and marketplaces. But one day they were invited to the king's place to tell a story there. And Fair Maiden, she sang her songs and spoke her poems. And the king, he was just there the whole night. He just couldn't take his eyes off her. And when she finished, he was like a little puddle on the floor, like a little pile of dust. But he was able to constitute himself. And he went to her and he said, I have never heard anything so beautiful, so graceful, so rich, and so lovely as what you did. Can I talk to you again? And she said, yes. And he saw her the next day, and then he saw her the next day, and the next day. And as time passed, Tatterhood knew there was something about her sister that was different. She had never, ever seen her so happy. She was just bubbling with joy and happiness. And one day the king came to see Tatterhood. And he said, Tatterhood, I know you and your sister are tighter than skin on a drum. And I also know you're sort of the gatekeeper of the operation here. But I want you to know I am so deeply in love with your sister, with my whole heart, and I cannot imagine not being with her. I want to be the last to say goodnight to her, the first to say hello to her in the morning, and I want to, and Tatterhood said, I think I get the idea. Okay. You're talking about a betrothal. And he said, I am. And she said, that is wonderful, and I'm happy for you, but there's one small problem. Older sisters marry first. And I'm older by about 6 minutes. And the king said, let me get back to you, okay? Let me get back to you. And he did. He had an idea. Now, he went off, and it just so happened the king had a brother, right? A different kind of brother because he was the king, but he had an older brother, which is kind of different because usually in a royal family, the older brother is what? The king. Exactly, but he wasn't. The older brother told the younger brother, I don't want to just sit my butt on a throne and tell people what to do. I want to make shit, I want to build things, I want to work with my hands, So that's what he did. The older brother, he became the blacksmith. And he built this huge forge, this really cool forge out of stones, right? And he ran the forge, and he made beautiful cauldrons and swords and shields and all kind of useful artistic stuff. And you could always hear him pounding away at the forge, and smoke was billowing out of it, and he loved doing that stuff, But one day the king came to talk to his brother, and he said, brother, I got a situation here, and he told him the whole story, and he listened for a while, and he said, do you mean the one that rides the goat? You talking about the one that rides the goat? Well, yeah, she does, sometimes ride she rides a goat. Yeah. Now, is that the one that carries that stick in her hands or something? It's a cooking spoon. She carries a cooking spoon in her hand. Huh. And she got that ragged robe or something and that tattered hood over her head. Yeah, she kind of wears that a lot. And the blacksmith said, she seems really interesting. I was kind of hoping to meet her, but, I'm always working and kind of shy. Can you set something up? Oh, I could. And they did. Now, they just started off slow. You know how they do it. We just did lunch. But during lunch, the sparks were already flying because Tatterhood was fascinated by blacksmithing. She was fascinated by making anything. She had all kinds of questions about metallurgy, and the different heats for iron as opposed to bronze or copper, and how you did pound things and weld things and make stuff like that. And he was fascinated by offshore navigation, which he'd never done, and he wanted to know the difference of teak, teak mass as opposed to oak mass, and cedar lapstrake and stuff like that. And they just had questions back and forth, but they met the next day, and she took him to the ship and showed him the ship. And then the next day he took her to the forge, and she couldn't help herself. She immediately started pounding away and making stuff, and then she decided with her spoon to make some stew, and they ate and hung out for a while, and that's how time just passed. It was one of those relationships that you didn't have to figure out. They just loved doing stuff. It kind of just grew from the ground up, and pretty soon they realized they did not want to leave one another, and so they decided to jump the broom, or as the old ones say, the old Norse would say, put a ring on it, I think, right? Well, they also decided, because Fair Maiden and the king, they wanted to get married, right? And Tatterhood and the blacksmith they decided to do it as a foursome, because they knew that years later Carl Jung would call that a quaternity, right? And as a symbol of wholeness. I think that's why they did it. Anyway, they did it that way. Well, there's the wedding, and then there's what happens on the way to the wedding. Yeah. Well, it was a Norse wedding, so they didn't get married in the palace. They got married on a promontory overlooking the ocean, So there was a procession from the palace out to the promontory, and of course, everybody was kind of gathered around Fair Maiden and the king, and they were riding these big horses, and she was all decked out in beautiful lace and stuff. And then back at the end there, way in back, there was Tatterhood. What do you think she was riding? Exactly. And the blacksmith, he was on a horse, And on the way to the wedding, she turned to her husband-to-be and she said, I wondered if you might have any questions for me before we get married. We're to be together for husband and wife. Is there anything you want to know about me? And he said, well, there's one question. And he said, but let me preface my remarks by saying, I don't think I admire any animal on this earth more than a goat. I love goats. I think they're great. They're tough, they're formidable, they're friendly, they're intelligent. But most people, for transportation, ride horses. And I just want to know why you always ride a goat. She said, excellent question. And she said, because with those with eyes to see, it's not just always a goat. And just like that, he looked, and she was on top this black Andalusian stallion, this huge, powerful creature. And he went, oh, I see. And she said, any more questions? And he said, well, I do have another one. That spoon you carry, I know you cook and stuff, but you seem to carry it a lot. And I just wonder why you always carry a cooking spoon. She said, another good question. She said, because for those with eyes to see, it is something else as well. And he looked, and it became this hazel wand with sprigs of hazel growing out of the bottom and the top. And it was just shimmering with light and power, And he went, whoa. And to himself, he said, I like how this is going. I do. Any more questions? And he said, just one. He said, now look, I'm not exactly a fashionista, I don't dress up that much. But I know you are a woman of means. You know, you came from royalty. You're a princess. Why do you always wear that ragged robe and that tattered hood? And she said, that's a great question, too. And just like that, the wind blew. And she said, because with those with eyes to see, it's something different as well. And he saw this beautiful raven hair just tumble off her head. And she turned and looked at him with these green eyes. And on top of her head, there was this gold crown, pounded gold crown with flowers just woven through it. And he went, wow, I see. You can imagine when they got to the wedding grounds, there was a lot of commotion. Everybody was amazed at Tatterhood's transformation. Everybody except her sister, because she'd always seen her sister that way. Well, the wedding was a perfect reflection of Tatterhood and Fair Maiden. There was iron and silk, and there was lace, and there was leather. Right? There was tuba throat singers and conga drummers and fire jugglers, and there were violins and harps and avant-garde improvisational theater as well. The celebration lasted for months because all those different ports of call that those sisters had visited, well, they all sent ships. And every day or every week, new revelers would arrive, and fresh food and libation and dancers and singers and stuff. And because the whole thing happened in once upon a time, musicians and people came from the past and the present, yeah. Robert Johnson played the blues, Billie Holiday and Bessie Smith sang. Duane Allman was there. All the Allman brothers were there. Dylan came, Van Morrison as well. One of my favorite parts was John Lennon got us all together and we sang Imagine. Well, of course, those goddesses and demigoddesses, they sent a big ship too, and a lot of them came. And they served from it a big libation. It was they had a number of those big carafes, ceramic carafes, and it was a libation called Beyond Babel, the elixir of fluency. And just one sip, you could speak any language ever spoken and understand all languages, and it was so cool. Abby was there. He was reciting the Kalvala in Finnish. It was so cool. My neighbor Dave DeVore was there. He was doing the Iliad in Greek. It was freaking amazing. People were singing in Swahili and Urdu and Hmong. It was just so cool. I left after a couple months because I told everybody I got to get back to Portland to tell all of you the story. But as I was leaving, Nefertiti got up and Cleopatra, and they said, "You're going to Portland?" I said, "Yeah." And everybody raised a toast. And Cleopatra said, "Portland." She goes, "I've been there. That is heaven on earth." She said. And Nefertiti said, "That's right. And I love frogs." She goes, "They're really small, but they got big voices." And everybody said, "Keep speaking up, Portland." And they cheered as we left. Well, for this celebration, I brought one of those carafes of that libation to this place. And I was going to have Lee out there at the bar just set cups out for all of you. But as I crossed the street tonight, I slipped on some of that Western Oregon ice, that wet leaf mulch. I slipped, I fell down, the carafe went up, cracked on the pavement, and I'm sure it's all in the Willamette River by now where the salmon and steelhead are enjoying it. So all I got is this story, and pretty much like that libation, it's done too. But the old Norse people, they'll tell you, these old fairy tales, they're nothing but a big lump of coal, the condensed experiences of many people over many, many, many years. But when somebody brings passion and enthusiasm and presence to them, they will light up and illuminate and warm us and give us something to gather around, at least for a little while. And all of you have been that presence, that passion, that fire, and that enthusiasm tonight. And all the people far away, too, that have been tuning in, you as well. Thank you all for helping me bring Tatterhood to life. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. We always finish with a sad farewell song, and some of you might know it, so sing along, and if you don't know it, sing louder and nobody will know, you know? Goes like so. Of all the money that e'er I had, I spent it in good company, and all the harm that e'er I done, alas, it was to none but me. And all I've done for want of wit, to memory now I can't recall. So fill to me the parting glass, good night and joy be with you all. Of all the comrades that e'er I had, they're sorry for my going away. And all the sweethearts that e'er I had, with a couple notable exceptions, they'd wish me one more day to stay. But since it falls unto my lot that I should rise and you should not, I'll gently rise and softly call, good night and joy be with you all. Good night and joy be with you all. Happy Halloween, peaceful Dia de los Muertos. Thanks for coming out, everybody. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Artichoke, for hosting us. Oh, you're not going anywhere, huh? Do you want a 4-minute story to leave on? All right. Okay. Now, if you need to go, I understand. Don't worry. Don't stick around. Somebody once told me, you got to know the difference between captivating people and holding them captive. You know, like, don't go. I got another one. It's only an hour long. You know, no, it's really short. Some of you might know it. It's one of my favorite ones. It happened on Halloween, and on Halloween you're supposed to have a care in Ireland. You know, do you think Peddler Tim had a care? Peddler Tim never had a care. And he was out, he was pedaling with his donkey behind him, late one night, moonlit night, Halloween night, coming down the road. And who should he see coming towards him? Death. With a big scythe for harvesting human souls, you know. He says, Peddler Tim, I've come for you now. For you know, every person has only so many years and months and weeks and days and hours and seconds and nanoseconds, and all your time's come to an end. Tim said, oh, Jesus, you know. Well, I knew you'd be coming for me, Death, at some point, so I guess I'll go. Good man, Tim. So many people struggle and strain. Tim said, that's not like me, Death. If my time's up, my time's up. Peddler Tim tied the donkey off to the tree, and he walked with Death. They went down this narrow pathway, and they came to a big stone, and Death took the staff, and he tapped on it. How many times did he have to tap on it? Exactly. Why is it 3? Why is it always 3? People always ask me that, Will, you're a storyteller, you must know. And I do know. It's because of the International Fairy Tale Code, Section 5, all right? It firmly states all transition will happen in repetitions of 3. And I'm not going to be fecking around with the International Fairy Tale Code, right? So not just once, twice, it was 3 times. And sure enough, the stone, it opened away. And Peddler Tim and Death, they went in. And they walked down through this long tunnel, you know, lit by these flaming torches. And they got into this enormous room, this huge room. It was filled with crooks and crannies and nooks and shelves. And upon every one there was a candle. Thousands and thousands of candles burning everywhere. Some huge candles and some not so big. And Death said, Peddler Tim, every candle is one human life here, you see. And you can see some people have quite a few years left and some not so many. And, well, that's yours, Tim. Oh, my. It was a sputtering little candle, you know. And Tim said, oh, geez. And then he said, Death, you know, my vocation in life is that of a peddler, but my avocation, what I truly love to do more than anything in the world, is tell stories. And I'm wondering, Death, could I tell one more story before I die? Well, that would be fine, Tim, but don't be going over the time limit there. Oh, I wouldn't think of it, Death. I wouldn't think of it. Now, you need to know this. Peddler Tim was a master teller of tales. And he could entertain you. He could fascinate you. He could inspire you. or if need be, he could bore you to death. And he started talking to Death. Once upon a time, Death, there was an ancient man who traveled the world near and far, and he finally came home after years and years. He was so tired, and he found his bed and he went to sleep. And he was sleeping so deeply he had a dream. And in the dream, he saw himself in a boat in the middle of a lake, rocking back and forth like this. And in the boat in the dream, he was so tired he fell asleep there. And then he had another dream. He was in a cloud that was floating away. And Peddler Tim kept talking to Death this way. And what happened to Death is what would happen to any of you if I kept talking this way. In no time at all, Death just... And you know when Death sleeps, he sleeps very deeply. And then Peddler Tim, quickly, he cast about and he found him. He found Death's supply of fresh candles. Aye. And didn't he take the biggest one he could find? And didn't he light that new life of his? He lit it right from the old life, you know. And it was burning brightly, and he plopped it down right on top of the old one, and it fit perfectly. And then Peddler Tim, he took Death's staff, and he made his way out the tunnel, and he pounded 3 times on the stone, and sure enough, it opened up. And Tim went out, and then he pounded again 3 times, and as it closed, he put Death's staff back into the tunnel. Because you don't want to be taking Death's staff, you know. Peddler Tim, he got out, he walked down the hollow, and sure enough, right beneath a beautiful Donegal moon, he found his little donkey there munching on the grass. And he untethered it. And he made his way out of the hills of Donegal all the way into a little village. And wouldn't you know, it's an amazing thing. There was a pub in that village. Can you imagine that? I know. And Peddler Tim, being in a sprightly mood, he went in and he bought everybody around that night. And he told everyone the tale that I've told you, and I was there that night, and that's how I know the tale. But Peddler Tim wanted me to make sure I told all of you 2 things. Number 1, when death comes for you, you might want to have a story or 2 to tell him. And the second thing is, the candles, they're in his big desk, bottom right-hand drawer. Right? And that's how Peddler Tim and you could fool death. Thanks for coming, everybody. Thank you. And thanks, everybody, for coming from afar, too. It's really good to have you here.
Twilight, though,